Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Point. I'm Brian Sterling, substituting for Rick Albert. This weekend, on the weekend of the big game, we're talking about a game of political football being played in Lansing. This week, the governor unveiled her proposed state budget. It is a massive spending plan, and now both sides of the political aisle are looking for an opportunity to score. It's budget season in Lansing, with some new faces on the playing field.
These are people that...
And a steely vet still at quarterback. At stake, $83.5 billion in taxpayer money. The playbook focusing on investments in education, infrastructure, and economic growth, but potential federal funding cuts loom like penalty flags over the government spending game plan.
If we were to see the Department of Education crumble, I am extremely nervous about how we have access to any type of funding for a student for education. Pell Grants, unsubsidized, subsidized loans, Parent Plus loans, Graduate Plus loans. So literally every type of financial aid from the federal government, including loans, would be shut down.
I think it's time we need to look at budgets and see what's in there, what works, what doesn't work, and let's work together and figure that out, because it's costing taxpayers a lot of money to live in this state, and that's how we can help our residents is, looking into what works and what doesn't work and make it more affordable for them.
Initiatives include the funding of education with a 4.1% increase in student allowance, $10,000 in per pupil funding. That includes universal free pre-K and preschool meals. Health, $2 million for dementia support. Jobs. The budget includes job training grants to train 35,000 workers and 120 new state police troopers.
How many new programs are going to be created, and how many are new spending lines should we anticipate?
Are we a donor state, whereas overall the amount of money that flows from Michigan to the federal government is higher than the amount of money that flows back to us?
I'm happy to follow up with you on more information.
Okay, I believe that we are.
Given the investments that you're asking, additional investments in the school aid fund, what level of confidence do you have that additional funds will turn around student achievement?
Not just in my community, but citizens around the state are very interested in government transparency. But the governor's last budget removed a lot of the reporting requirements that were in that budget.
Have you had any internal discussions about what would happen if we get all that money back in more a generic block grant type situation? How would you work with the legislature and the administration together to work that out if we do get it all back together?
We're actively monitoring the changes right alongside you. We're always happy to share what we know, and we're working with our agents to interpret policies coming out of the administration and the courts to understand what it means for our state.
Noticeably absent from the presentation, the governor herself.
I've had about 15 people text me since I've been sitting here, so I have to ask the elephant in the room question. You're proposing Governor Whitmer's budget today. Where is Governor Whitmer, and why isn't she here today?
Oh, well, that is cool.
The governor was actually in Grand Rapids, touting new programs at Grand Rapids Community College.
There's a lot of work to do. It's sobering to see some of the scores that have come out. It's not acceptable, and that's why we're going to stay focused on it.
What's not included? No new road funding plan, but $28 million to explore road funding options and to conduct a study and pilot of potential road usage charge revenue options.
I think what we see is there are a lot of loose ends and a lot of unanswered questions, and so I look forward to the process. I do think it will be a journey.
West Michigan lawmakers took up positions on both sides of the aisle. Representative, I wanted to get your perspective as an educator and as a lawmaker on the concerns you have about what's happening at the federal level and money coming or that might not be coming to Michigan.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the question. Yes, as the minority vice chair for the School Aid Fund here in the state of Michigan, the reliance we have on federal funds as they come in is, I believe it's around $2 billion, as was stated today, maybe a little bit over that, for our education funding. While we do have a substantial rainy day fund here in the state of Michigan, not just in the general fund, but also in schools, I believe we're going to bump that up to $550 million. It does not allow us to cover, if we need to backfill everything from the feds, that's going to be a huge issue for us. And so I understand that, a lot of this might be political posturing on the behalf of the current administration. There's a lot of, we talk about the chaos and confusion that is coming out, and the fact of the matter is just suggesting that some of these things are up for grabs, or there's questioning around how that money is going to flow, puts us all into a position where we have to prepare for the unknown. And it's leaving our schools, our communities, organizations, cities, governments just wondering what's going to happen and how are we going to manage that. And of course, we can't enter into a new school year. When the budget's due for schools, their fiscal year starts July 1st. They can't enter into that funding cycle with this kind of uncertainty.
Obviously, that's a stressful situation. The proposal today, $10,000 per pupil funding, that's impressive.
Oh, it's so exciting. I mean, Michigan has been behind on per pupil funding for a number of years, and so to be bringing this up to $10,000 is just going to really be a game changer for our schools and our students. The more we can spend in our schools on our kiddos, that's just the foundation for success for them over time. So when we look at the future of the state of Michigan, it can't be a better investment than in our kids and our education system.
Still, there's some concerns, though, on the return on that investment with the test scores that are lagging behind, especially when it comes to reading and math. What are your concerns there?
Well, we're still recovering from the pandemic, and we will be for a while. There's a wave of kids that were impacted by that, and so that certainly plays into it. And the moves we made last year in improving the literacy statutes here in the state of Michigan, that we're moving back to the science of reading and really working with students and families to identify kids earlier that might have struggles with reading. I think putting those two things together is really going to help move us forward on the reading front. And I think the next thing we need to look at is the science of math, or what's called numeracy. So it's that same idea, and how we are using the right tools to teach our kids, and that's accounted for in the budget as well. So I feel that we have all the pieces in place to move forward with success, and that expanded investment is going to make a big difference.
First blush look at this budget, what are your thoughts?
I mean, what today was kind of the fluffy stuff, the nice stuff. We'll start seeing the actual budget come in this week, and that gets into the nuts and bolts of what's going on. It all sounds really good, but you really have to start digging behind the curtain here, especially looking at what kind of expansion and new programs are being offered here. We're going to do a deep dive and really look at what's working and what's not working for the taxpayers.
A lot of angst over federal funding and some of the chaos surrounding that. What is your take on that? And I guess, how concerned should we be about the amount of federal money coming into Michigan and whether or not that's in jeopardy?
I don't think it's in jeopardy. I think it's just going to be reshifted or relooked at how it's being delivered. I don't anticipate being cut off on certain programs or things like that. I think a lot of that's getting played out and being shuffled, and it's happening in public, right? That people are seeing what these dollars are being used for, how they're being used, and how they're sent to the state. So I think it's a little educational right now. I'm not too concerned right now of things not coming from the federal government.
$10,000 per pupil funding. Is the state getting that return on investment?
That's a great question. You see studies everywhere that it's not how much money is being spent on a child to see their success. It's really about the involvement of a loving, caring adult in that child's life. If we can get that, then that kid is going to succeed. We can't just throw money at things and think that we're going to get better improvement. Michigan's actually lowering in its reading scores. We need more accountability and programs that help those childs one-on-one, rather than just saying, here's some extra dollars towards it. Let's really look at those programs and make sure they're being used and really having the success. We need more accountability with those dollars.
Are you satisfied with the overall fiscal health of the state?
I'm a little concerned of the expansion. As you heard today, we were about $46 billion back in 2010, and now we're at about $86 billion. And then there's always based on possible recessions and what happens with the auto industry. So a lot of those things are out of our control. I like to see that we make sure we have some stabilization funds and rainy day funds in case we do go into a recession.
More money for police.
Absolutely. Law enforcement is critical, and I think it's a critical component of state government and government in general. Make sure that people feel safe. And so we need to make sure we've got the boots on the ground and people filling those positions.
The governor is hoping to have this done by July 1st. Is that too optimistic?
don't think it's too optimistic. You do have a new legislature coming in, and we're going to do the due diligence and look at all these programs, make sure that they're working for the taxpayers. And you can't just turn that on and off. It takes some time. It takes the hearings. It takes the conversations. It was actually my bill a couple years ago that set that statutory July 1st date, so I would love to see that happen so that people can be confident in what their budgets are for the year. But we're going to take our time. We're going to make sure that citizens are getting the return on their taxpayers.
Also, the issue of transparency that came up in this hearing today. How big of a stickler is that for you personally?
It's a big issue for our caucus. We've seen in the past 2 years dollars just go out not knowing what they're being used for nonprofits that just started before they got the money. It needs to have some accountability and transparency, and I like what the House is going to do, make sure that our names are attached to anything that we ask. If it's a good project, you should be proud to put your name by it.
Still to come this morning on To the Point, Republicans in the House plan oversight on some of this spending. We'll tell you what they plan for the budget still ahead. Welcome back to the Point. This week in Lansing, the governor unveiled her budget. It comes at a time of divided government in the state, with Republicans controlling the House and Democrats controlling the Senate. House Republicans are promising more oversight on fiscal spending. I want to start with the budget presentation and your reaction to the governor's spending proposal. What's your take?
Well, I think, every year when Governor Whitmer proposes her budget, there's some good ideas in there. She works really hard to pull these ideas and message test them. And so there's often things in there that are very popular. And so that's a good thing. We embrace new ideas. The thing is that we have to pay for these ideas. And under Governor Whitmer, since she became governor, the spending has increased 43%. And so when she comes up with new ideas, we have to pay for them. And so what we're looking at is, let's take her ideas, her new ideas, and let's evaluate what the return on investment for taxpayers are. And then let's take the ideas that are already there, the programs that have started over the last few years of her administration, and let's evaluate those. And then let's also look at the programs that have been there for years and years and years and evaluate those. And then let's fund the ones that provide the best return on investment for the taxpayer. So my guess is some of her ideas will provide a good return for taxpayers, but they're going to come at the expense of ideas that aren't working as well, that have been there for a long time. And this is an approach that hasn't been taken to our state budget in the whole time Governor Whitmer's been there, is, starting from essentially what is constitutionally and statutorily required, and then working up from there and building a budget based on the things that are going to have the best return for taxpayers. Then there's three things that I want to do that I think are important. Number one, we call it a public safety trust fund. It means for the first time ever, the state dedicating state money for local law enforcement to make our communities safe. The second is fixing our roads without raising taxes. And the third is reversing the Democrat income tax hike that took effect last year. So what I would like to do is fund a budget that's smaller than the one we have now that does those things.
I want to go back to, you talked about the size of this proposal. It is stunning. It's almost, the budget almost double since 2010.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's what you're looking at. And then what Whitmer proposes are a bunch of tax increases in this budget. So, you talk about that kind of government growth, and then they come up with more tax increases. What we did not see in this proposal was Governor Whitmer's plan to fix the roads. Now, I've heard from the media that Governor Whitmer may actually introduce a plan in the next week, But let's look at the history of this. When Governor Whitmer came into office, she proposed a 45 cents a gallon gas tax increase. No legislative Democrat had the courage to introduce it. And for 7 years, we haven't seen a proposal from her. I came out with a proposal that would fund our roads without raising taxes, and it's very detailed. And then I challenged her, come out with your plan. Stop just talking in very high level talking points about fixing the roads. Now I hear she's going to come out with a plan, but the problem is if it's not integrated into your budget, how are you going to do it? In my view, we have to use existing revenue in order to fix our roads. And if they're going to raise taxes, why aren't those tax increases in her budget? This is different than how she did it the first time. It's going to basically change this budget proposal no matter how she introduces it. So that'll be interesting to see.
Mr. Speaker, a lot of the sentiment on both sides of the aisle in Lansing seems to acknowledge that Michigan families are still struggling. Did the budget address those concerns?
I think not really. I mean, again, I think some of the ideas we're putting forward, let's cut the income tax by reversing the Democrat income tax hike that took effect last year where they raised the income tax. The income tax going up during these difficult times didn't make a lot of sense. And I think it's one of the reasons the Democrats lost the election, and the Michigan House was the only chamber in the country that flipped from Democrat to Republican. In part was because the taxes went up in a time where the people were looking for more money in their pockets. What the people in Lansing forget, and the bureaucrats, this is taxpayer money. It's not our money. It's not the government's money. And that means we have to spend it wisely. And if we don't get a better use for that dollar than your family would, we should return it to you. So I believe if we can fund the roads without raising taxes, then that is more efficient government. You're going to have to make tough choices in order to fit that within the existing budget. If we can then reverse the Democrat income tax hike, you're going to get more money in your pocket, and I think people will have a more efficient government.
There was a lot of angst yesterday about the federal funding levels. How concerned are you about a loss of federal funding?
Look, I mean, people elected Donald Trump to shake up Washington. The things that he's going through at the federal level are similar to the things we're going through at the state level. We hear year after year after year how the federal government is spending more money than they have, and how they're creating a huge federal debt. And people for generations are going to have to pay off this debt. So what Donald Trump is doing is he's coming in and he's doing the similar approach. They're evaluating every single spending program in the budget, and they're trying to make a more efficient use of tax dollars. And it's true that will reduce the state budget too. But I believe the government has gotten too big at the federal level and the state level, and it's not sustainable. And so we're going to have to start making adjustments to government. I mean, let's say they cut it by 1%. I mean, that's a lot of money, but it's needed because, nowhere else can you just spend trillions of dollars more than you make. You can't do that. So I applaud what they're doing, going in, tightening the belts of these departments and making sure dollars are spent more wisely. I mean, they told me that $25 billion of the state budget is the Medicaid budget. That's something that's just exploded. And these things all come with ties from so you take the money and then you must do what the federal government says. One thing Democrats are talking about right now is, I think they say 40% of the state budget is federal money. During Biden, that was creeping up to a time where you're getting in some states where a majority of the state budget is federal. At what point is the federal government driving the states? And, you know, this country was intended to have strong states and a weaker federal government. Well, now the federal government is essentially taking over the states and giving them a majority of their budget in some cases, and then forcing them to do the things that the federal government wants. And people move to states like Michigan or Texas or Florida or California because they like the opportunity to have different policies. And so for that reason, I like what Trump's doing, and it's going to bring more local control to the states, so the people have a bigger voice.
Talk a little bit about education funding, $10,000 per pupil. Are we seeing a return on investment when it comes to that level and when it comes to student achievement?
Yeah. So number one, I mean, last year, and I give Governor Whitmer credit for this. Another reason why the Democrats lost the election in Michigan and the Michigan House flipped to Republican is because Democrats made some dumb decisions when it came to the school budget. Democrats, for the first time in over a decade, did not increase the amount of money going to schools. Secondly, they cut funding for school safety and mental health by 92%. That's the funding for your school resource officers, for school safety, and for counselors for kids in school. We made a real issue of that on the campaign, and it was very effective in defeating several Democrat incumbents. And so give Governor Whitmer credit. She's learned from that. And when you look at her budget, she now is proposing more money for schools and funding school safety and mental health. That's good. I would just say, I think more money for schools is admirable. We want that. We also want to focus on accountability in schools and ensure that it's spent in the right places. We just got a report that Michigan's fourth grade reading scores have dropped again and are near the bottom of the country in terms of fourth grade reading. And so you're not getting the results for the money. So we all want more money for education. We want our teachers to get a pay increase. We want to make sure the kids have everything they need. But it's going to have to come with policies that measure success and pick the right metrics, things like kids reading, to determine where the funding goes and how it's spent.
Real quick, when do you hope to have the budget finalized?
Well, under the Constitution, we must do it by September 30th. And so we want to do it as early as we can, but we'll get it done by September 30th. That's our goal.
July 1st, too rosy, you think?
You know, it's going to take time to go through every program and ensure we're getting that value for your dollars, especially with an $83 billion budget that's grown by 40-some% under Whitmer. So I'd love to do it by July 1. I think realistically, it's going to take us till September 30th to get a deal, but we will get a deal. I believe it.
Lawmakers on both sides of the aisle agree that Michigan's finances are in pretty good shape, especially compared to other states in the union who are running on a budget deficit. The negotiations on the budget now begin in earnest. Thanks for joining us this week on To the Point. I'm Brian Sterling. Have a good week.